Planet Dolan.
From newborn babies to people just trying to perform a dangerous stunt, we count 10 people who survived being buried alive. Hey there guys, I'm Denji Dolan's mysterious brother. I'm here to blow your mind with academic research, insight, and other dark magic.
Number 10.
Philomena Jonet. Back in 1867, a 24-year-old woman caught cholera. Not long after that, she was pronounced dead. Of course, since this is back before medicine was really any good, judging if someone was dead or not was actually pretty difficult. In this particular case, they got it wrong, but they didn't know that and buried her in the cemetery. 16 hours later, they opened the coffin to see if she was still dead, and there were signs of life. However, she died for real the next day and was buried once again.
Number 9.
Angelo Hayes. Back to more modern times, Angelo Hayes crashed his motorcycle on the way home. He was thrown headfirst into a brick wall and was then rushed to hospital. The doctors couldn't find his pulse and declared him dead, which is pretty reasonable since his face was so disfigured his parents weren't allowed to see the body. He was buried 3 days later and was exhumed 2 days after that for insurance investigation purposes. The examiners found that his body was still warm and he was actually in a coma, which allowed him to survive the limited oxygen underground.
Number 8.
Harry Houdini. Easily the most famous stunt magician of all time, he wasn't always so successful in his endeavors. Houdini was buried under 6 feet of dirt with no protective casket. He managed to push one hand above the surface before passing out. His assistants quickly pulled him out and he was lucky to get out of the situation alive. Later on, he did 2 other stunts, which weren't of the same caliber as the first. One involved surviving for an hour and a half in a coffin underwater. The other involved him being restrained in a straitjacket and being locked in a coffin on stage.
Number 7.
Tom Guerin. Back during the potato famine in Ireland, there were a lot of mass burials and consequently many people were buried alive. However, there were none more notable than Tom Guerin, who was buried at age 3. Since it was so long ago, there's no reliable source on exactly what happened. Some say he was buried for 2 days before being discovered. Others say he was discovered in the process of burial. Either way, he was crippled for the rest of his life since his legs were broken during the process, but he managed to build up fame as a beggar and a poet after the fact.
Number 6.
Californian Baby. In November 2015, 2 women heard a muffled baby cry while on a walk on a bike trail in Compton, California. They called the police, who arrived not long after. The police could hear the cries as well, and they found that an infant had been wrapped in a hospital blanket and buried under the asphalt. The police managed to identify the mother and posted a $500,000 reward for her arrest. Not too long after, she was found and is now facing charges for attempted murder and child endangerment.
Number 5.
Natalia Pasternak. Natalia from Siberia often went on walks with a dog in the woods, but one day when she was collecting birch sap, she came across a bear who initiated an attack on her. She tried to defend herself with the birch branches, but was soon rendered unconscious. Later on, she woke up, trapped under rubble and dirt. Apparently, the bear did this to save her for later. Luckily, 2 hunters stumbled upon the site. The hunters rescued Natalia and later on went out and killed the bear.
Number 4.
George Hayward. While he was hauling straw in 1904, George Hayward was struck in the head by a pitchfork. A prong penetrated his skull and bore into his brain. 2 weeks later, his eyes shut in apparent death. But he was still painfully conscious and very much alive. But he had no way of letting those around him know. He was buried not long after. But luckily, grave robbing by doctors was a common practice back then, and 2 such grave robbers came across his body, and George managed to make a slight motion to indicate his being alive before they began dissecting him.
Number 3.
Brazilian man. A woman from Ferraz de Vasconcelos was visiting her family tomb when she noticed a man's head and hand above the ground, struggling to escape his own grave. Rescue workers arrived on the scene and excavated him. Then paramedics took him to hospital for a medical checkup. No one knows why he was buried in the first place, but they think it was because he lost a fight. According to his nephew, he, quite understandably, suffered severe psychiatric problems after this event.
Number 2.
Chinese Baby. In May 2015, a middle-aged woman in the Guangxi province of southern China was collecting herbs on a mountainside for her traditional medicine when she heard a baby's crying. Police managed to pull the baby out of a shallow grave and it was rushed to the hospital. Forensic and medical analysis revealed that it had been trapped in the grave for 8 long days. Apparently, the parents buried the child because he had a cleft lip, and they didn't want to raise a child with any disfigurement.
Number 1.
Essie Dunbar. In 1915, Essie from South Carolina suffered from an epileptic attack that seemed to kill her. The funeral service was requested to be delayed because her sister wished to see her off. This request was listened to for a day, but her sister still hadn't arrived, so they buried the body. But not long after that, the sister arrived and asked for the body to be brought up so she could have one last look. Once the body was removed, Essie sat up and smiled at her sister, and everyone at the service fled. It took Essie some time to convince them that she wasn't a ghost, but eventually she got through to them, and she lived 47 years after her first funeral.
That's it for this countdown. And have a good one!